Hello, Design 570. I am delighted to be here with my good friend Shilpi Chhotray, who is an ocean advocate and has a background in ocean policy and environmental management. She is the Global Communications Director for a wonderful movement called Break Free from Plastic. And she is going to talk to us about what that means, being the lead in developing stories and what I think of as kind of like an art director, but she can walk you through what it is that she does and walk through one campaign in particular that was pretty interesting and very cute. So Shilpi has her BS in environmental policy and planning from Virginia Tech, is that right?
Yeah.
And her master's in resource management and ocean policy and coastal planning from the University of Charleston or University of South Carolina? University of South Carolina. And she brings that with an incredible passion for activism, for plastic pollution activism that's grounded in social justice. So thank you so much for being here, Shilpi. And first of all, why don't you tell us what being the communications director of Break Free from Plastic, what that means?
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Josie, for being here. This is really fun to do this with you. So Break Free from Plastic is a global movement made up of nearly 2,000 organizations now working all around the world at different points in the plastic pollution life cycle. And I am the global communications lead, which means I'm responsible for managing a team at the global level that is constantly chasing stories. So we're looking for stories to amplify in mainstream media, in digital media, in traditional and non-traditional spaces to make sure that a lot of the false narratives and the industry narrative is constantly debunked, and that the right narratives grounded in social justice and systems change, like Josie mentioned, are really at the forefront of people's hearts and minds. So that's how we win campaigns and victories and make really strong policy change at the municipal, the state, the federal, even multinational levels. So our geographic focus is on the US, Asia Pacific, and Europe, with growing work in Latin America, China, and Africa. And my communications team is embedded in different places around the world. So we have a really strong regional perspective that's constantly feeding into global and vice versa. So we have communications staff in, New York, LA, San Francisco, Paris, Belgium, Manila, Bali,
Wow.
New Delhi, kind of all over. And then we have like a very robust membership that are constantly feeding us stories and getting out in the real world. So that's a little bit of what we do for communications and narrative building and storytelling.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what what platforms are most effective for getting these stories out, which are really what I find so inspiring, is that they're often the undertold story, the industry stories that get buried by mainstream media.
Yeah.
And so what do you find for your communications team are the platforms that you are trying to push these stories out onto?
It's really twofold. So we have a big earned media push and constantly developing strategies to stay on top of the earned media space, because we operate largely as a nonprofit. We don't work with PR specialists to feed money into media. So it's really crafting that narrative that's compelling enough for journalists to tell that story. And we spend a lot of time actually developing relationships with journalists and media to get our messaging across. And then, of course, digital media platforms are huge. So we're very active on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and more so YouTube. And I think, there's kind of this two-way street between earned media and digital media, where a lot of journalists will find us through our large social media presence. They like to see themselves in our feeds with their stories and there's names attached to it. So it's kind of, feeds each other. It's a little bit cyclical. And yeah, I think there's, a lot of growing interest in expanding digital media presence, especially now because we're all hunkered down at home. So it's really the primary way for us to get our messaging out there.
Right, right. And I was looking at your website, and I follow you guys on Instagram, and I've been impressed by your use not only of photographs, of the very impactful photographs of the pollution in different global locations, but also a really lovely, playful use of illustration throughout, both on your website and through various campaigns. So maybe you could walk us through your Just Recovery campaign, because it popped up on my Instagram feed, and I was immediately attracted to the illustration. And then I thought about if you could also talk about how you hone down these messages that are very succinct, but I think there are 5 or 6 panels to this Just Recovery
5
program.
principles.
Yeah.
No, I'd love to. And I think, using illustration and almost like a children's book for adults is what I like to explain it as, is super important, because plastic pollution can be so heavy, and we don't want to inundate our feeds with plastic pollution porn, as I like to call it. It can be so depressing, and it almost is counterintuitive, because then it's not demonstrating that real solutions exist. So we have to balance it with, these are the hard hitting truths about what's happening with plastic in many areas of the world that we might not see, but also balance it with ways that are going to draw people in and be a little bit more light and illustrative. A lot of our topics are extremely technical. We talk about chemical recycling, waste incineration, the global waste trade, these kinds of things that need to be conveyed in a way that are going to captures people's heart and minds. If you talk about chemical recycling, it's like, okay, why? I don't care. So we have to sort of come up with ideas on how to convey this information. And so we have a very strong, at this point, Rolodex of graphic designers and illustrators we work with. So I will show you one of them. I'm going to share my screen here. So as Josie mentioned, the Just Recovery work was really important. It started when COVID hit in March, and there was a lot of fear and anxiety. People in Break Free from Plastic, our members, were really worried about their jobs. We work a lot with waste pickers around the world. These are really vulnerable individuals in society who are in the informal waste economy and sifting through the unwanted trash that doesn't have value. So they're trying to scramble as whatever they can out of it to make ends meet. And this is, large populations are often they're migrant populations in India, Philippines, Indonesia. So we were really worried, especially about that end of the plastic pollution life cycle. And we wanted to create something that spoke to the need for better government accountability, corporate accountability, and really prioritizing both people, economy, and planet for what we're calling the Just Recovery. So the end product was 5 principles for Just Recovery, as you can see on the screen. 1, prioritize health for people and planet. 2, invest in solutions, not bailouts. This speaks to the $1 billion industry bailout that the plastics industry is asking for, which is simply ridiculous. The bailouts need to be going to impacted communities. Replace single use with sustainable systems, demand corporate and government accountability, and then engage impacted communities. So how do we get to this point when we work with 2,000 members across the world in a very short timeline? So I will backtrack to April. My team put out what we call the Break Free from Plastic messaging guide when talking about COVID-19. People were really concerned with how do we stay on top of the plastic pollution crisis when there's so much fear and anxiety over the safety of like reusables? And at this point, there wasn't those statistics going around on virus contamination on different surfaces, ends up plastic. It actually lives longer on plastic than most other materials. So we started with this, which is how do we talk about coronavirus? Usually when I develop communications campaigns, I use the VPSA framework, which is value, problem, solution, action. So we kind of walk through the value, the problem, solution, and action. We pull together sample talking points based on thought leaders in the movement. So we went to, okay, who was working on reusables at this time with the global perspective, 3 to 4 people from all over the world. Same with the transmission on plastic, addressing inequities. We work with a lot of low-income communities, communities of color. We wanted that they were feeling really grounded in this framework. Of course, calling out exploitative behavior. We are an activist movement, so we are often campaigning against corporations and industry. And making this connection to fossil fuels. 99% of plastic is from a fossil fuel-based source. So this goes on and on and on. There's some information here from articles, what's happening in the news, industry media clips, so we could stay on top of what the industry was putting out. And then started looking at graphic ideas that we really liked, that we were inspired by. So it took a while to get from here, obviously, to the principles, a web page that I just showed you. And so there's a couple steps in between I'd love to kind of frame. So May and June was what we called the Just Recovery Visioning. And one of our member organizations called Peak Plastic Foundation really took the lead. And we developed what we called a narrative task force, which included about 40 people. We could call them narrative thought leaders from around the world, to take this initial document and this framing and have bi-weekly conversations of what does just recovery look like. The 5 principles that we ended up with here, it started out as, maybe 2 to 3 pages for each principle, and data and input from people from all over the world, because this isn't just a US based movement. It really had to make sense for everyone involved. And then our job on the comms team was to actually synthesize all of this information and make it super pithy. In the meantime, as I mentioned, we had that graphics and illustrators list. I discovered this brilliant woman, Brenna Quinn, her artwork, I think on Instagram. And she has, as you can see here, just an incredible way of talking about complex subject matters. This is what the climate movement looks like. She already was communicating on movement, all these intersections, really, I wish I could zoom in. I don't think I can. Oh, I can. Really like capturing the diversity of the movement. You see a lot of brown and black faces here. This is really important to me as a communications lead when we're working at the global level, is to work with illustrators that can understand why diversity is so important in what they're illustrating. So we thought she would be a great fit. Immediately reached out to her, and she started drawing up some concepts based on the longer descriptions that we had. And this was around May and June. In July, we knew we had a major coming up called Plastic Free July. We do this every year. And because this was the 3rd year we were doing it with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, we knew we couldn't do business as usual. Okay, bring your own reusable container. Like, it's so much bigger than that. So we used the Just Recovery framing with, finally, we got to our 5 principles whittled down. So we used each week of July to introduce a principle. So week 1 was prioritize health for people and planet. What does that look like? And so you can see with our Plastic Free July toolkit, there was different action items happening on every day and every week of the month based on these Just Recovery principles. And we developed a pretty amazing social media toolkit involving Brenna's graphics, involving the framing of this Just Recovery work, and then really highlighting the members working on each principle. So it A lot of information, a lot of content, but it was, I think it was a super successful campaign. We grew our social media presence immensely if you're looking at tricks growth, but I think the qualitative piece is really where the heart of the movement is, and in the growth that way. So you can play around with the Break Free from Plastic Free July toolkit if you're interested, and you can kind of see all the different projects and campaigns we were highlighting in this umbrella campaign, the framework. Um, what else can I say? Let's see, we have these other awesome graphics as well. We worked with Brenna and a second woman, Binta, out of the Philippines to do some of like myth busting, crowdsourcing facts and figures, and we really wanted people to get that right narrative out there because there is so much misinformation from industry. And then the final piece that I wanted to share is one of the end products from Peak Plastic Foundation, which is a Break Free member. They developed principles for each of the 5 videos. So there was one introducing prioritizing health for people and planet, investing in solutions, not bailouts, replace single use with sustainable systems, demand corporate and government accountability, and then engaging impacted communities. Josie, I don't know, would it be okay to play one of them maybe?
Sure. I think, yeah, and then we can, this is amazing. This is really amazing.
Okay, cool.
That you've created this framework that then other material can hang on to in this really coherent way. It's very.
Yeah, and I think the video angle is important because even if there was the illustrations, we really wanted to like humanize the people in our movement that are working on these issues like tirelessly.
Yeah.
So I'll click on principle 4 because it's demand corporate and government accountability, and that's to me,
let's do that one.
What we do. So I think, yeah, this one's really cool.
There's a double standard by companies who take advantage of global south communities, producing materials that we have no infrastructure to manage and telling us that the only way out is to invest in bulk solution technologies such as chemical recycling and incineration. But that only takes us further away from traditional knowledge and principles of reuse, undercuts waste pickers who are extremely valuable to the waste management system, and traps us into this loop of overconsumption. This is unacceptable. Companies need to rethink and redesign their flawed single-use plastic packaging model, but this will never be a voluntary step. Therefore, we need our governments to step up and start to enforce existing laws the way Kenya and Rwanda have done. And we need to add new policies to completely phase out single-use plastic. We also need governments to recognize the role that waste pickers are playing in the system and start investing in infrastructure that's complementary to waste pickers, such as material recovery facilities and mandatory separation at source policies. We need ambitious policy informed by credible third-party science.
So yeah, we had these for every principle and shared them on our Instagram. So I think they probably, Peak Plastic Foundation is very new. It's actually my former boss who has started this organization. He's the executive producer of Story of Plastic, actually. So he's created this beautiful documentary film that I highly recommend, Story of Plastic, and now he's doing short videos in his new group. So the videos did really, really well on our Instagram channel. I will say that, these are kind of long for Instagram. So we're noticing that the length does matter, like shorter GIFs and things that are 30 seconds or less usually perform a little bit better. But if you're someone that's really interested in this issue, these videos are like almost like mini documentaries. And we've been getting really good feedback from media on this as well. So yeah, I wanted to
I just wanted to kind of point out that what you have done is the ultimate design project of taking and you've walked us through the steps, and I just, it might not read as design right off the bat, but to me, it's absolutely the steps of taking this very complex information and making sure that your research is thorough and comprehensive and organized, and then synthesizing that to be simpler and simpler and simpler. And
Yeah.
realizing that to connect to this very complex information, you have to get down to this very bare bones um, uh, language and image together. And
100%.
and that is a
And
crucial.
the buy,
Go
you
ahead.
know, having buy-in from all these people from around the world, you know, seeing their input turned into a little graphic is intimidating. It's like we want to do good by the people that
Right,
put in
right.
the time, energy in it. But I think, you know, a lot of the people come from more of a technical background, which is actually what I do too, but I sort of have fallen into the comm space, which I really enjoy, is that they are understanding the value of why this needs to be so synthesized. So we've seen a big shift in the last 3 years. Like I think even 2.5 years ago, this would have been a lot more difficult to get sign off on. But we live in a really visual society, so.
Right. So that graphic quality, you probably have, do you have graphic designers in your communications teams?
We have people that can knock things out very quickly. Like if we need a quick turnaround on a report that we know this isn't going to capture anyone's attention, we use Canva, which is like a very user-friendly tool, but not at the level of like Brenna and Vinta. So we commission graphic designers and videographers and.
Right. You use freelancers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We have a fairly good budget to play, so.
Yeah.
That's exciting because that's really important. Like if you're a communications professional or art director, Josie, as you've mentioned, you need to have the adequate budget to be able to commission people to do these things. Like I am not an artist, you know, I'm coming from it from like a holistic perspective of all of these supply chain issues and the people involved, and I can make those connections, but I'm not the one making
Right.
the graphics, right?
Right. But you recognize the importance. You've showed us this process that, and so is one of your tasks to pare down the language into those 5 very succinct. I was very impressed at how succinct those paragraphs for each of the 5 principles were. Very readable, very easy to translate from your website to Instagram. Is that?
Yeah, it goes through several people's hands before it comes to me, but yeah, I typically am the one signing off.
Yeah, that is an art in and of itself.
I know, I guess I never really thought about it that way, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I you know, whenever you have to hone something down, even by character count, or it's
well, even the captions, like the captions that match when we push it out, and I always tell my team, like less is more. It's much harder to write shorter captions than it is to go off on all of these things that you want to capture, because it can be very nuanced. What I prefer doing is keeping it super sweet and pointing it to a peer-reviewed research article or an expert
the
that
links.
can, super critical, because we as the Break Free from Plastic communications team are not necessarily an expert in, you know, waste to energy or certain policy pieces of legislation that are happening on the ground. So we want to point to the people that are working on it in real time and give them that credit and also that resource for more information.
Right. And we can kind of wrap up here, but what is so interesting is you taking very complex information, simplifying it, adding some graphics, but then also reconnecting to the source material and being this conduit also for journalists to go from the simple actually to the more complex. So you have this, it's an interesting navigational process, and it's all, I mean, I just want to point out what a design process it is, and how important being able to synthesize all that material, have the visual component is so so important. And maybe we'll just, do you have anything more, I think, that you want to add here, or
Um,
just wrap up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're working with multiple stakeholders, I think that's the probably the most challenging and the most exciting part. And so I will say, like for me, working with the global team, working with vendors at all over the world in different time zones, and then of course having these like very strict deadlines, it's super important to have like a project management tool that's going to work for you and the team. So I think, you know, like thinking about organization and just, you know, good project management and what is a good fit for you and a team is really important, because we've had to turn things around really quickly when you're working in like 3 different time zones. So that's part of the process, is figuring out the internal communication and organizational systems.
And do you find, because your audience is so broad and you're
Yeah.
including so many different communities, do you find your language changes given who you're
Well, we budget for every project, we budget translation. So the
Mhm.
Just Recovery work, I think, was translated in 52 languages.
Wow, that's
Uh,
incredible.
yeah, so we have, because we have a global membership, we have people in all of these different places in the world that might require a different language. So they will work with a colleague of mine on my team to feed them the language and the typeface and the fonts that are required, and then we
Right.
update it and send it back. Yeah.
Right.
So
So
the
those
service
little
we provide.
boxes are quite important because you can trade out
Yeah. So
the
that's a good point, is like the artists or the graphic designer and the artists or the illustrators we work with from the get-go, we're like, we need an editable file, because and space. Some characters,
Yep.
like Hindi is boxier, it goes longer. In Japanese, it's up and down. So these are all things we kind of have to
Absolutely. It's
negotiate.
consideration, and the more you can consider it from the get-go, the quicker
Yes.
the whole project will evolve.
Yeah, and I mean, we've gotten feedback before, like, okay, like we're not on Instagram, we need this for Twitter. And we used to only create square images because it's
Yeah.
easier for us to
Yeah.
think about image, you throw it up on everything. So now we're thinking, okay, we have to have Twitter too, because some of our groups are not on Instagram and we want them to be able to share it. So it's definitely a learning process. Every time we do something like this, we send a survey out to collect feedback to see how we can improve.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. Well, thank you, Shilpi. I just have so enjoyed seeing a little bit of your process. I might also say that Shilpi is the founder of a skincare line called Samudra Skin and Sea, and it's a beautiful.
And Josie did the designs for us.
All right, my seaweed designs are on the packaging, and it's a very cool, very small but very impactful small face cream company, and I use that face cream. I love it. So anyway, Shilpi, you have many talents, and thank you for sharing what you do with us. I really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.